Coming up on Arirang News, South Korea continues to battle a third wave of COVID-19, reporting more than 700 cases on Monday. The authorities are making tests more convenient, setting up testing sites throughout the Seoul area. President Moon Jae-in says the South Korean government is going to provide 1 million public sector jobs for people whose incomes have been hit by the pandemic, especially senior citizens and people with disabilities. And the CDC in the United States approves the COVID-19 vaccine made by Pfizer. Millions of doses on their way to hospitals around the country, first to vaccinate frontline health workers. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. The number of coronavirus cases in South Korea dropped sharply on Monday from the day before, but it's still near its recent highs. There are cases across the country, but with so many of them in the Seoul area, the capital is setting up 150 temporary clinics to test people for free. Jang Tae-hyun reports.
South Korea reported 718 new cases of COVID-19 on Monday, a sharp fall after the all-time high daily figure of 1,030 on Sunday. Most of the new infections were in the greater capital area, but sporadic infections continued to pop up nationwide. Health authorities say that now is the toughest moment of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Based on our calculation as of December 13th, the R number is at 1.28. We predict that there will soon be 950 to 1,200 daily cases.
In a bid to find asymptomatic cases, the government is opening 150 temporary health clinics across the capital region on Monday. Anyone can visit to get a free test. They'll be set up at subway stations and near universities with high foot traffic. They will be open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day, including weekends. People can also get tested anonymously at the temporary clinics. For convenience, 2 more types of tests, saliva PCR and quick antigen testing, are being implemented. People can choose between the 3, but authorities advise people to take the nasal PCR test if possible. In particular, if you have any symptoms or were at the same place as someone who has the virus, officials say it's better to get the nasal test. Authorities warn that should the situation continue, it's inevitable the nation's distancing level will be raised to the highest tier, level 3. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
Worldwide, the death toll from COVID-19 has reached 1.61 million. According to the website Worldometer, the United States has by far the highest death toll at 306,000. It's followed by Brazil, India, and Mexico. There have been a total of 72 million cases worldwide. Again, the U.S. has recorded the most cases at 16.7 million, followed by India and Brazil. The head of the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has approved the use of the COVID-19 vaccine made by Pfizer. Millions of doses are now being distributed across the United States with the goal of vaccinating 100 million Americans by March. Lee Seung-jae reports.
The United States is on the brink of rolling out vaccines as U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Robert Redfield on Sunday signed off on Pfizer-BioNTech's COVID-19 vaccine. The approval allows inoculation to officially move forward for those aged 16 or older. The CDC's decision comes a day after the CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, an outside group of medical experts that advises the agency, voted unanimously to recommend the vaccine. The FDA gave the Pfizer vaccine emergency use authorization last Friday. With the latest approval, the CDC director noted that the first COVID-19 vaccinations are set to start as early as Monday. Trucks containing the first packages of the vaccine began leaving Pfizer's facility in Michigan on Sunday, with delivery expected across all 50 states by Monday. The CDC noted that shots should first go to frontline healthcare workers and residents at long-term care facilities. Speaking to Fox News Sunday, U.S. Operation Warp Speed Chief Advisor Dr. Moncef Slaoui said the U.S. hopes to immunize 100 million Americans by the first quarter of 2021. He added the U.S. hopes to have 40 million doses distributed by the end of December using Pfizer and Moderna, which is expected to get emergency use authorization for its vaccine later this week. Another 50 million to 80 million doses are due to be distributed by January, with similar numbers in February. According to Slawi, for the U.S. to get herd immunity, the country needs to immunize about 75 to 80% of its population, a mark he hopes to reach by May or June 2021. 이승재, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in says the South Korean government is planning to provide more than 1 million public sector jobs to vulnerable people whose incomes have taken a hit from the pandemic. Those getting the jobs will include senior citizens and people with disabilities. In a meeting with his top aides on Monday, Moon said that all efforts will be directed at stopping the virus and reviving the economy. Moon also called for thorough preparations so that the government can swiftly implement next year's budget and set aside for emergency payments.
중소상공인들과 자영업자들에 대한 지원이 특히 시급합니다. 기존의 지원 대책에 더해 국회에서 통과된 3조 원의 3차 재난지원금 예산이 피해 맞춤형으로 신속히 집행될 수 있도록 집행계획을 빠르게 마련하고 집행 속도도 높여주기 바랍니다.
Moon stressed that the burden needs to be shared in times of difficulty, noting that the self-employed are having to pay rent even though they can't fully open because of COVID-19. He called for programs to encourage landlords to cut rental costs and for the expansion of tax benefits and financial support so that responsibility is shared equally and not borne only by the socially vulnerable. In the first half of next year, South Korea is going to provide a one-time subsidy of 500,000 Korean won. That's around $460 to each of the country's roughly 90,000 people working as home care workers and after-school teachers. The measures were announced today by the Labor Ministry as part of new support measures for so-called essential workers, who include those in healthcare, delivery services, call centers, and public sanitation. Also, to help sanitation workers, they'll get rid of the big 100-liter garbage bags for households, which often end up being too heavy to lift. South Korea is planning to give tax credits and deductions to companies for making investments that reduce their carbon footprint. The Ministry of Economy and Finance said Monday that it's planning to allow deductions of 3% for large companies, 5% for medium-sized companies, and 12% for small ones. This is part of the government's efforts to make South Korea carbon neutral by 2050. The plan will be reviewed this month and could be passed early next year. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, good to have you back on.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks in New York last Friday closed mixed. Uncertainty about U.S. stimulus, the prospect of a no-deal Brexit. What's the story in the global markets as we start a new week?
Okay, well, the U.S. stock markets generally had a bad week. S&P and NASDAQ fell for the second part of the week. Dow, it fell during the week. It had a slight recovery on Friday, but overall for the week it was down. And the reasons could be summarized as stimulus, government funding, unemployment figures, and worries about the double-dip recession. So stimulus negotiations in Congress, it's stuck over two main issues, whether there will be assistance to state and local governments. Democrats want it. Republicans do not, and whether there will be legal liability shield for employers when employees catch coronavirus while working. Republicans want such a liability shield. Democrats do not. And while they say they're going to keep on negotiating, I'm not sure if these two problems can be reconciled before Christmas. Now, second issue, government funding. Basically, the U.S. government is running out of funding because the budget bill is still being discussed. So they're passing 1 week funding. The last one was passed on December 11th. The next one must pass on December 18th. So they'll just keep on going with short-term funding bills. And then unemployment, it was higher than expected. The October figures show that there were 245,000 jobs created, which was way below what was expected. And the unemployment rate is 6.7%. This is worse than where it was during the global financial crisis. And all these concerns are now being summarized as there's a possibility now that U.S. may undergo a double-dip recession. But on the other hand, not all bad news is particularly bad news. According to the new U.S. newspapers this morning, the futures seem to be up. Dow futures are up by about 100 points, and S&P and NASDAQ futures are also slightly up. Europe, it also had a pretty bad week. FTSE, CAC, and DAX, they were all substantially down last week. There was a meeting between United Kingdom Prime Minister Boris Johnson and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen over whether they should continue with the trade negotiations or just give up. And they did decide to proceed with the negotiations, but there's no guarantee that it will be finished by the deadline, which was December 31st. There is a possibility that they'll paper over the differences and continue to negotiate while working under temporary agreement, but I'm not sure if either side is too excited about that process, so that accounts for the lower markets. And then the Asian markets, Nikkei was up, Shanghai and Hang Seng Shanghai was up today, Hang Seng was down today, so it's generally mixed. Japan did have report higher business sentiments, but the Asian markets seem to be looking at what's going to happen in the U.S. and Europe, and just basically waiting until the end of the year to see what's going to happen.
Well, here in Korea, it was a fairly volatile session today. Retail investors were big buyers, institutions and foreigners selling. Tell us about the local markets.
Okay, well, Kospi, it had a very interesting week last week. It was going up and down on every other day, but every up day ended up with record highs. Today, because perhaps Friday it was up, today it was down slightly. It fell 0.28% compared to the end of Friday sessions. Now, the interesting thing is the market was rising in the morning, but it fell after 1:30 p.m. And the foreigners sold on the net for 3 straight days. We're not quite sure exactly why, but it may be that Kospi, they feel that Kospi has gone up too high, or it may be profit-taking, or it may be waiting to see what happens in the Fed FOMC meeting that's due later this week, or whether because Korea is now undergoing much higher incidence of COVID virus. Kosdaq, it rose continuously since late November, except for December 8th. It rose today slightly, 0.12%. Individuals and foreigners bought Kosdaq stocks, institutions sold.
Well, it's the start of a new week, Professor. We're almost out of time, but what's on your radar in the days ahead?
Okay, well, Ministry of Economics and Finance is supposed to announce 2021 economic plan sometime this week. There's a November employment figures and a Bank of Korea financial statement analysis for the third quarter, which will look at how well the Korean companies are doing. But the big news is obviously the Fed FOMC meeting in the United States on December 15th and 16th. We'll be looking at particularly what happens with their bond buying program and what do they feel about their lending program that they finance with the money from the Treasury, which the Trump administration announced that they will discontinue at the end of the year.
Got it. We'll catch up on all of that later in the week. Thanks so much for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
It's a season for giving, and a charity in South Korea has received an anonymous donation in a paper bag of 60 million Korean won in cash. That's around 55,000 US dollars. Our Kim Yeon-sung has this story.
In front of the community chest of Korea's office in Chuncheon, Gangwon-do Province, stands a man dressed in black. In his hand, a paper bag. When a worker comes out to check on him, he puts down the bag and quickly leaves. Inside the bag, 60 million Korean won in cash, or roughly 55,000 US dollars. Along with a letter asking for the money to go to 50 elderly people who live alone and children who are their family's breadwinners.
When I opened the bag, there was a bundle of 50,000 won bills wrapped in newspaper. I was really surprised. So I went out to chase him, but he was already gone.
Early this month, the Senior Welfare Center in Chuncheon received an anonymous check for 10 million Korean won, or around $9,000. The community center is waiting for the donor to tell them how they want the money to be spent.
If the donor doesn't appear, we'll put the money to good use, thinking that donor didn't want the left hand to know what the right hand was doing.
For those in Gangwon-do who are finding life tough, these acts of kindness could make it easier to get through this freezing winter. Kim Hyun-sung, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching.